A boy who cannot speak, a dog once abandoned for failure, and an overnight journey to send the final signal in a world turning its back. This is not just a story about courage, but proof of the power of friendship. When words are gone, the heart speaks instead. Where are you watching this story? Please share where you're following along, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next touching stories, where small things create great miracles. At the end of a tree-lined street in a peaceful neighborhood, where white fences are carefully trimmed and car horns rarely echo, there is a small house with an always lush green lawn and windows that are perpetually cracked open to welcome the sunlight. The residents here live a neat, polite, and orderly life, to the extent that people sometimes believe everything here is always safe. But safety, like the afternoon sunlight, can be both warm and deceptive. In that house at the end of the street lived two people quietly, Ava and her 11-year-old son Milo. The boy has a small frame, messy hair, and deep brown eyes like a still lake. But what makes Milo different from other children isn't his appearance. He doesn't speak, not because he's shy or timid, but because he cannot speak. Milo was born mute. Since birth, he has never once called out "Mom," never cried audibly when in pain, or screamed out in fear. He communicates with the world through his eyes, facial expressions, and his small hands. Ava is a night shift nurse, resilient and gentle. Every morning before leaving home, she bends down to kiss her son's forehead, making a hand gesture meaning, "Mom will be home soon," a personal sign language that mother and son have created over the years. Milo responds with a nod and a warm look. Though he cannot use words, between them exists a deep understanding that needs no explanation. Milo doesn't have many friends. Actually, he has none at all. The neighborhood children, though kind-hearted, don't know how to play with a boy who doesn't speak. Adults usually look at him with pity rather than respect. So Milo withdraws into his own world, where there are pages filled with symbols, imaginary stories full of images, and a quiet boy observing everything unnoticed. Milo's life flowed quietly until the day a dog named Bruno entered their home. Bruno was a golden retriever with gleaming honey-colored fur and deep black eyes that always reflected calmness and gentleness. He was introduced by an animal therapy center to support Milo, a special therapy for children with communication disorders. But what Ava didn't know was that Bruno also carried a troubled past. Previously, Bruno had been a service dog for the city's rescue team. He participated in emergency missions and had rescued people during the major landslide in the Western Mountains. But then during one mission, Bruno reacted slowly for a moment, just one moment, and his teammate was seriously injured. No one blamed Bruno, but they no longer trusted him. They placed him on the no longer suitable list, and if not for the intervention of a kind elderly trainer, Bruno might have been euthanized like many other animals that had failed. When he arrived at the therapy center, Bruno was no longer the energetic dog he once was. He was quiet, unresponsive to commands, didn't bark, didn't play. He just sat there, looking into the distance, as if waiting for something that was lost. Everyone had almost given up hope until Milo walked in. That day, the boy didn't say anything. Of course, he just stood still observing, then quietly approached Bruno. He raised two fingers to his forehead, rotating them in the air, a small sign he often used to say hello. No one expected anything to happen, but Bruno lifted his head for the first time in many months. He stepped forward, slowly and carefully, then sat down in front of the boy. No command needed, no guidance. Between the boy who couldn't speak and the dog who had forgotten how to listen, something connected. The trainer exclaimed with emotion, "It's the first time he's responded. 6 months now?" From that moment, Bruno officially became part of the small family at the end of the street. Milo and Bruno were almost inseparable. Each morning, Bruno would carry Milo's backpack strap in his mouth, gently pushing the door open for him to go outside. When returning from school, Bruno would sit waiting at the gate, his tail wagging slightly when he saw the boy's figure from afar. They developed their own sign language: touches, embraces, gentle taps on the palm. Each sign was a command, a question, or simply, "I'm here, don't worry." Once Ava saw her son sitting on the floor, drawing something in his notebook. Bruno lay beside him, head resting on the boy's lap. She gently asked, "What are you drawing?" Milo didn't speak, just showed his mother the picture. It was an image of a boy standing in a flower field, arms spread wide as if flying, and beside him was a dog with a red scarf, eyes looking up at the sky. She looked, then smiled, speaking softly as if afraid to break something sacred. "It's beautiful." Bruno wasn't just a therapy dog. He was Milo's first friend, the first person to understand the boy without words, the first person to make Milo genuinely smile, not because someone made him happy, but because he could be himself. Milo once wrote in his notebook in slanted handwriting, "Bruno doesn't need me to speak. I don't need Bruno to bark. But when I raise my hand, he understands. When he sighs, I know. He is my voice." In a place where people always believed that safety was silence, Milo and Bruno had proven that some things don't need to become words to move the entire world. A boy who cannot speak, a dog once abandoned, and a friendship that transcends all language barriers. That is the real miracle, something that no one expected would come from the simplest and most sincere things. Since the day Bruno officially became a new member of the family, the atmosphere in the small house at the end of the street gradually changed. Not noisy, not bustling, but bit by bit, like gentle breezes coming through the window, life had touched corners that had been silent for too long. Bruno remained the same, calm and composed, not barking randomly, not running around wildly, not demanding attention. But one thing was clear: he always kept an eye on Milo, always staying close enough to respond, and quiet enough not to intrude on the boy's private world. And the most special thing, Bruno understood Milo, literally. From the moment Milo raised 2 fingers to his forehead and rotated them in the air, a sign only he used for greeting, and Bruno stood up, approached, sat down in front of the boy. Between these two seemingly alien beings, a connection formed that no one could explain. From a dog once trained to find missing persons, to a child who had never uttered any sound in his 11 years of life, both stifled by a silent past. But thanks to each other, they began to hear again what the world had overlooked for too long. Milo couldn't speak, but he was extremely intelligent and observant. From a very young age, he had developed his own hand signal system, not standard sign language for the hearing impaired, but symbols he created himself, tied to his emotions and inner world. When Milo tapped his finger on his wrist, it meant, "Be careful." If he placed his palm on his knee and stroked gently, it meant, "It's okay." When he clenched his fist and opened it 3 times, it meant danger is near. And Bruno, incredibly, understood it all. No one taught Bruno these signs. No one needed to. Milo didn't use food rewards or commands, he just repeated the gestures and observed the reactions. Bruno didn't respond by memorizing, but through feeling. He looked into Milo's eyes, heard his soft sighs, felt every small movement at the boy's wrist. And gradually they became a new language, something that existed only between 2 souls forgotten by the world. Each passing day, that friendship grew stronger. In the morning, when Ava was preparing for work, Bruno would watch Milo brush his teeth, eat breakfast, then wait ready at the door. He didn't need a leash, just the boy's gaze and a slight nod was enough. On the way to the special class, Bruno didn't run back and forth like other dogs out for walks. He walked close by, silent but alert. Whenever a stranger came too close, Milo only needed to raise 2 fingers and slide them past his shoulder, the signal for watch. Bruno would immediately turn his head back, not barking, just quietly maintaining the right distance to ensure his friend's safety. In the afternoon after school, Milo would often take Bruno to the park, Not to run around, but to sit still. The boy would bring his sketchbook, sit on the familiar wooden bench, drawing the surroundings or imagining another world. And Bruno would lie below, head resting on the boy's feet, eyes half closed but ears always listening. Just a touch of Milo's hand to his forehead and drawing a diagonal line to his shoulder. Something's not right, and Bruno would immediately rise up, scanning the entire space. Once, a group of middle school students were playing around and accidentally hit a ball against Milo's shoulder, causing him to fall. Before the boy could get up, Bruno had rushed over, standing between Milo and the group of children, eyes fixed and ears perked up. Not aggressive, but not allowing anyone to come closer. One of the kids laughed loudly. "What's wrong with this dog? Does it think it's a bodyguard?" Milo quietly stood up, dusted off his clothes, then signaled to Bruno. Palm open, placed over his heart. "It's okay." Bruno lowered his ears, returned to sit beside the boy, as if nothing had happened. The group of students quietly left. They didn't understand, but Milo did. He leaned down, placed his forehead against Bruno's. No words, but something warm had been conveyed through that gentle touch. Ava gradually realized that Milo was no longer the boy who always sat alone by the window. He had begun to step out of his comfort zone, not because he was forced to, but because he was no longer alone. Once she secretly read Milo's diary, the only thing he didn't lock away because he believed no one would read it if he didn't write in words. But that day, among pages full of symbols, she saw an actual line of text written in shaky handwriting. "Bruno doesn't need me to speak. I don't need Bruno to bark. But when I raise my hand, he hears. When he looks at me a little longer, I know he's asking, 'Are you okay?' And I'm always okay because he's there." She read that line 3 times, then closed the book, eyes stinging. After years of being a mother, she had worried that her son would never be able to connect with anyone. But now, right before her eyes, a bond had formed. Stronger than any words, more enduring than any expectation. The friendship between Milo and Bruno didn't come from books or training. It came from similar wounds, from years of being bound by silence, and from the longing to be understood, to be loved without having to become someone else. And when those two quiet souls touched, they were no longer silent. They began to whisper, not with voices, but with trust. At first, no one paid much attention. A child missing school for a few days because they were sick, then another suddenly moving away in a hurry. Everything happened quietly, as if life in the neighborhood continued to flow steadily, without disruption. But Milo saw it. He observed more carefully than anyone. He remembered faces that had once greeted him with a nod or a slight smile. He remembered the red shoes the boy from house number 17 used to wear, and the blue kite hanging on the balcony of the corner house. Now those things were gone. There was no official news, just a few whispers among parents at the school gate, or sighs when picking up children late. Strange, the Jensens moved without telling anyone. "Where's the girl from house number 8? Haven't seen her for days." Ava heard vaguely but didn't think much of it. Her life was already stressful enough with night shifts, patients, and all sorts of issues. But Milo didn't overlook it. He recorded everything in his notebook, day by day, each face, each expression that disappeared. And Bruno, the dog who was always by his side, also began to act differently. Once, when the two were walking home in the evening past the park, Bruno suddenly stopped in the middle of the road. His ears perked up, his back tensed, his eyes fixed on a dark-colored car parked across the street. An older man sat inside, the window only half lowered, enough to reveal an angular face and eyes. Cold. Those eyes weren't looking at Milo, but past him, at the children playing in the distance. A gaze containing no joy or affection, but something silent, cold, and slippery like spreading oil. Bruno growled softly. A very slight sound, but Milo recognized it immediately. He had never heard this dog make any sound close to a threat like that. He gripped the leash tightly, pulled gently, signaling, Let's go." Bruno obediently followed, but kept turning his head back until the car disappeared completely behind the trees. That night, Milo opened his sketchbook and began to draw. He couldn't describe it in words, but his hands were very clear. The face of the man in the car was recreated with strong pencil strokes, rugged. He even drew the sunglasses resting on the dashboard, the chipped paint on the car's hood, and a small corner of the license plate. Only the first 3 letters visible. Below the drawing, Milo wrote a single line in symbols. "His eyes don't look like normal people's." The next day, when Ava happened to see that notebook, she was startled. The drawing was too detailed, and the anxiety in Milo's eyes when he pointed to it made her unable to take it lightly. Though not wanting to frighten her son, she decided to bring the notebook to school, find the principal, and suggest reporting the incident. "My son may be more sensitive than normal," she said, trying to keep her voice calm, "but he is very observant. He never draws like this without reason." The principal, a tall man with a protruding belly who often pushed his glasses up his nose when wanting to appear serious, took the notebook, looked through it, then frowned. "Ms. Ava, I know you're worried about Milo, and I care about him too. But this is just a drawing. Children imagine a lot. If we investigated everyone just because of a drawing like this, we wouldn't be able to do anything else. There's also the license plate." She patiently pointed to the numbers. "He doesn't make these things up." The police chief was called in to discuss. A man in his 50s with a deep voice and experienced demeanor, but also unable to hide his reluctance. After looking through the notebook, he sighed. "We cannot investigate based solely on a mute child's imagination. We need evidence, witnesses, at least someone who heard or saw something firsthand." Ava was stunned. In that moment, she clearly saw the insult in the way they said "mute child," as if Milo wasn't qualified to be trusted. She clenched her hands but kept her voice soft. "He may not be able to speak, but he doesn't lie." The answer was just a polite nod. The meeting ended in an unfinished atmosphere, full of doubt, and no one bothered to keep Milo's notebook. They let her take it back, like a harmless toy that an overly imaginative child had drawn. That evening, Milo sat silently by the window, the notebook open on his lap, while Bruno lay at his feet, eyes wide open, not leaving the scene outside. Ava placed a glass of milk in front of her son, gently touched his shoulder and whispered, "I believe you, Milo. Even if they don't, I still believe you." He didn't answer, just silently tilted his head, placed a hand on his mother's, then turned to Bruno, using his finger to signal, "Be alert. Don't look away." Bruno nodded, truly a very slow nod, as if he understood the weight in that instruction. And from that evening on, whenever a strange car passed through the neighborhood, Bruno would raise his head. His eyes were no longer dreamy as usual, but tense, sharp as a blade just drawn from its sheath. Silence had begun to transform into waiting. And in that waiting, something was moving underneath, as if the darkness had begun to shorten its distance to the house at the end of the road. That night, the wind suddenly turned strange. No rain, no thunder, but the cold wind kept howling in waves as if pushing something closer. The streetlights flickered and went out completely. The entire neighborhood sank into an odorless, soundless darkness. A silence that made one feel as if space had just been sucked clean from the world. Milo was sitting in his room, in the middle of drawing an unclear human figure, when the light bulb suddenly went out. He paused, looking up. The room was immersed in the pale gray of moonlight filtering through the window. He slowly stood up, not having time to step out before Bruno rushed to the window, letting out a sharp bark that resonated in the unusually quiet night. Milo startled. Bruno never barked like that, especially at night when he had signaled rest. But now the dog's fur was standing up, his back arched, ears perked high, eyes blazing as if something truly threatening was out there. He ran to the window, gently pulled the curtain, And then Milo froze. On the unlit road, a gray truck was silently rolling away from the last house on the street, Mr. Lester's house. No lights, no loud engine noise. The vehicle just slowly moved out like a ghost in the night, the back covered by a large black tarp. The way it moved, not too fast, not hurried, made one's skin crawl. Milo turned to Bruno, eyes wide, hands beginning to move quickly. "Follow, don't be seen, come back." Bruno didn't wait. He jumped through the side door on the porch, which Milo kept open for emergencies, then disappeared into the darkness. Milo turned back, opened the drawer, took out an old toy car that had been disassembled. From that toy, he had created a small recording device by attaching a mini camera and an old rechargeable battery. Nothing professional, but enough to record a few minutes of video. He neatly attached it to a spare collar, then ran out to the yard, waving when he saw Bruno's shadow just passing the fence. "Attach this," he signaled. Bruno obediently lowered his head, letting Milo attach the collar, then lightly licked the boy's hand. Without needing to say more, he turned and ran off, disappearing completely into the space between the shadows. Only the sound of wind, rustling leaves, and Milo's heartbeat getting faster and faster remained. He stood motionless there for 10 minutes, then 15. Space seemed to freeze. The house had no light. His mother was still sound asleep after a long shift, not knowing that her son had just sent a dog into the darkness to track a phantom on 4 wheels. 32 minutes later, Bruno returned, but not as usual. He was breathing heavily, fur soaked, front leg with a long bleeding scratch, and the collar completely askew, as if it had been thrown through something narrow and sharp. Milo rushed out in panic, signaling, "Are you okay? Logically, what happened? Where?" His hands dancing wildly in the moonlight. Bruno just whimpered softly, then dropped his head at the boy's feet, his eyes still looking toward the road, as if to say, "Still out there." Milo gently removed the camera, plugged it into his tablet. His hand trembled slightly as he opened the video, not knowing what he would see. At the beginning, the image shook constantly, trees flashing by, broken patches of darkness. After a while, the camera captured an open scene, the small road leading to the edge of town, where there were no more streetlights or houses. And then, for a moment, the image of an old warehouse appeared, with mottled brick walls and rusty iron doors. In front, the gray truck stopped. A man, face unclear because he was backlit, opened the rear door, then quickly pulled something long inside, covered by a black tarp. That's where the image began to get noisy. The camera spun around in the darkness, then cut off completely. Milo stared at the screen. His heart seemed to drop into an icy pit. No sound, no clear license plate, but each frame that passed screamed something wrong. The next morning, when Ava woke up, Milo had printed out a frame from the video the moment the truck stopped in front of the warehouse. He placed the photo and the mini camera on the dining table, then sat waiting for his mother with a more determined look than ever. Ava was startled as soon as she saw it. "Milo, did you record this? Is this the car from last night? Where did you go last night?" Milo didn't speak, just repeated the danger signal 3 times in a row, then pointed to Bruno's wound on his leg, pointed to the warehouse in the photo. He drew additional arrows, sketched the route the truck had taken, and finally circled a single word: Lester. That afternoon, she brought all the materials to the police station. The police chief and an investigator carefully examined the video footage, but they still shook their heads. "The image is too noisy, can't see the license plate clearly, can't identify anyone. Without specific evidence, we can't act just on intuition or assumptions." "But it's real," Ava tried to stay calm. "My son and that dog followed and saw it with their own eyes. Neither of them could possibly imagine these details." The young officer lowered his head, somewhat apologetically, but the commander spoke directly. "We don't doubt the boy's good intentions, but we need legal evidence. Everything is still too vague. Ava left with the file in hand, her heart heavy. Milo didn't cry. He didn't know what crying was like. But all the way home, he didn't draw anything, didn't move his hands. He just sat next to Bruno, holding the dog's collar, his head leaning slightly against the warm fur. And Bruno, despite his painful leg and labored breathing, still lay motionless beside him, eyes never leaving the car window. As if, even if no one believed, he and the boy would not give up. Because that night, they had seen what the entire neighborhood was trying to ignore, and Milo knew this silence was just the beginning. After the evening when the truck left Mr. Lester's house and Bruno returned with a wound on his leg, Milo became even more silent than ever. Not the silence of fear, but the kind of silence that suppresses something growing inside. Something like a storm trapped in a glass bottle, silent but full of pressure. Each day at school, he carried the brown leather notebook, where he had recorded everything. Maps of the strange car's appearances, descriptions of the warehouse on the edge of town, tire tracks on the sandy ground, even the signs of unease that Bruno showed through his eyes and behavior. Every small detail was marked by his own symbol system, a small triangle for danger, concentric circles for second appearance, red diagonal lines for unusual disappearance. No one taught him these methods. Milo figured them out himself, because he understood that if he couldn't use his voice, he had to make others see what he knew was real. Ava, after her disappointment from working with the police, still persisted in finding ways. She sent emails with the video to local media outlets, child protection centers, even non-profit organizations. But the answers, if any, were very similar. Sorry, not enough evidence. We cannot use unverified materials. Or worse, complete silence. Milo saw it all, and he understood. The adult world doesn't operate on intuition, emotions, or instincts. It operates on procedures, paperwork, things he didn't have, because he couldn't speak. At school, he also began to feel a growing sense of alienation. The teachers didn't exactly hate him, but their looks had changed. Once, when Milo was drawing during recess, a group of students passed by and whispered, "Drawing weird stuff again. He probably thinks he's a mute detective." Another one laughed. "If there was really something scary, adults would have done something by now. My mom says the boy is just imagining things." Milo didn't react. He just gently placed his hand on Bruno's back, the only friend who never mocked him, and continued drawing. Until the regular parent-teacher conference. It was a heavy Friday afternoon. The sky was gloomy and about to rain. The small meeting room at the school was full of well-dressed parents, teachers wearing name tags, hands folded in front of their stomachs. When it was Milo's turn, the homeroom teacher began in a gentle voice. "He's very intelligent, has great visual talent, but there are also some behaviors that need attention. Recently, he's been drawing a lot of rather sensitive content, scenes of people being followed, maps, trucks, warehouses. It seems like he's obsessed with something. We're concerned that he's living in an imaginary world of his own creation." Ava remained calm. "My son is not imagining things. He's talking to you in the only way he can." The principal now intervened, still with his neat appearance, slightly protruding belly, an even voice but with an underlying tone of superiority. "Ms. Ava, I understand you love your child very much, but you need to face reality. Children need to learn to integrate. Milo needs to learn to live with reality, not wave his hands to tell fairy tales." That statement fell like a slash. Not loud, not noisy, but sharp enough to completely cut through the remaining patience in Ava's heart. She tightened her hand on her thigh, her eyes trembling with anger, but still maintaining a calm voice. "There are things happening in reality. Just because you don't see them doesn't mean they don't exist. And when a child like my son, a child who cannot shout, tries to signal, draw, collect information, and you don't listen, then it's you who are living in a fairy tale, a story where the main characters are always adults and children are considered meaningless. No one answered. The meeting ended in an awkward atmosphere, the sound of chairs being pulled and superfluous, formal goodbyes. No one mentioned Milo again. That night, Milo didn't eat dinner. He wasn't hungry. He just sat by the window, his notebook open, the pen in his hand trembling slightly because his hands were cold. Bruno lay at his feet, head resting on his leg as usual, eyes half closed. He gently stroked the dog's ear, squeezing it slightly, an old signal between the two. "I'm thinking." Then Milo turned to the last page of his diary, where the rare lines in written language had been preserved. He took a deep breath, then wrote down, slowly, carefully, as if each word was a stone being placed in the foundation of something very big. "If no one believes me, I will go with Bruno. He doesn't need me to speak, but always understands. And there are truths. Only those who know silence recognize first." After writing, he put down the pen, closed the notebook, and hugged Bruno. No tears. Milo had never cried, or perhaps he had, but in a different way. In his heart, the decision had been made. No one believes, no matter. No one listens. No need, just Bruno. He and that dog would do what the entire world was turning away from and avoiding, find the truth. And Milo knew clearly, when lights are gone, when words no longer have weight, then silent footsteps will be the last thing powerful enough to shake an entire sleeping world. That night it didn't rain, but the wind blew strangely cold, as if something was lingering in the air, unnameable but enough to make one's skin tighten. In the small room at the end of the street, Milo didn't sleep. He sat with his back against the wall, flipping through the pages of his diary now full of maps, notes, sketches of Lester's face, and symbols that only he and Bruno understood. Bruno lay beside him, head resting on the boy's leg, breathing evenly and slowly. But with just a slight movement from Milo, the dog's ears would immediately twitch, eyes open wide, ready. Milo looked out the window, moonlight casting pale patches of light through the tree branches. He leaned down, lightly touched 2 fingers to Bruno's shoulder, then drew an arc upward. A signal that had been used many times, but this time more special than ever. Go now. Without a sound, without a leash or flashlight, 2 shadows, one small, one silent, left the house through the back door, slipped through the fence and headed straight into the darkness. They followed the trail behind the residential area, across the dry stream, the reed field, and the sparse forest that Bruno had crossed during his first tracking. The dirt path smelled of weeds, and each step seemed to sink deep into a feeling of uncertainty, not fear, but the sense that something irreversible was coming very close. After nearly 30 minutes of silent movement, the warehouse appeared in the moonlight. It stood precariously in the middle of a gloomy wasteland, forgotten for many years, with moss-covered brick walls and loose sheets of corrugated metal. In front was a small yard full of weeds, surrounded by barbed wire fence taller than a person, with only a small gate locked by an old iron chain. Milo crouched down, raising his hand to signal Bruno. "Silence. Be alert." The dog flattened himself to the ground, ears perked up, sniffing the air. Both silently pressed against the gate, where there was just enough moonlight for Milo to see the rusted lock. He bent down, pressed his ear against the iron layer, his heart racing. The first few seconds were absolute silence, but then, sob, mom dot, dot, dot. A sound thin as silk, trembling like a breath, echoed from behind the brick wall. Not loud, not clear, but for Milo, who had lived in a wordless world since childhood, it was a cry for help that resonated more powerfully than any bell. He looked up at Bruno, their eyes meeting in an unspoken understanding. Milo took out a small flashlight from his pocket, tightly wrapped in cloth to prevent light from escaping far. He shone it on the lock, noted the embossed number sequence, then began feeling his way around the fence, looking for another way to approach. Just then, a soft sound behind him. Milo turned his head. Too late. A large, rough hand covered his mouth tightly, yanking him backward. He struggled desperately, the notebook falling from his hand, pages flipping open in midair. Bruno growled, rushing forward like a bullet, but another figure was faster. A hook kick to the stomach sent Bruno rolling on the ground, doubled over in pain. "Knew you'd come back," Lester's voice rang out, cold as groundstone. "You disobedient little brat." He tied Milo's hands with zip ties, threw the boy like a sack over his shoulder. Bruno struggled to get up, trying to crawl toward his master, but was sprayed directly in the face with pepper spray. The dog howled in silence. A scream no one could hear, but Milo heard it with his whole heart. As he was being dragged across the ground, he looked at Bruno struggling in the patch of scorched grass, eyes red with pain and helplessness. And in that moment, amid the darkness, fear, and smell of cold earth, Milo made a sign, index finger touching his chest, twice, then opening wide like spreading waves, finger pointing upward. "Bring the signal back. Call Mom." Bruno paused. Despite the burning pain, despite the blur, he still saw that hand. And in the teary eyes of the loyal dog, Milo saw a promise. Bruno turned his head, ran, disappeared into the forest. Lester didn't see anything. He dragged Milo into the warehouse, opened the heavy iron door, pushed the boy down a small staircase, pitch black as hell. Below, a cramped, cold, damp cellar that smelled of rusty iron. In the corner of the cellar, two children huddled, a girl with messy brown hair, tears stuck on her cheeks, and a boy wearing a dinosaur hoodie. The boy Milo had once drawn in his notebook, the first child to disappear. Milo was thrown onto the freezing concrete floor, the ties cutting painfully into his wrists. But he didn't panic, didn't cry, didn't breathe heavily, because Bruno was gone, and he trusted the dog would return. In the cellar without sound, there were only occasional whimpers from the children and the clicking sound of the lock when Lester locked the door. The boy who couldn't speak, but if someone could see Milo's eyes right now, they would understand. He didn't come here to surrender. He came to bet everything on his faith and on a friendship deeper than any voice could reach. In the thick darkness of the night forest, without lights, without trails, only the sound of dry leaves crushing under hurried footsteps and the howling wind rushing through the tree canopies as if wanting to swallow all other sounds. Bruno, his body tattered, his once golden fur now caked with mud and blood, was running at full speed through paths that only he and Milo had walked together. Between his teeth, tightly clenched, was not any familiar toy, but Milo's red scarf, a small piece of cloth the boy always wrapped around his wrist, like a personal sign that never left him. Now that scarf was stained with blood. The dog sniffed with each breath, not out of fear, but because the wound on his left hind leg had begun to bleed again after breaking through the rusty steel fence earlier. That scratch had not yet healed, now torn open further by thorny branches and broken glass along the forest path. But Bruno didn't stop. His legs shook, his chest tightened from the cold wind and pain, but his eyes never faltered. They burned, determined, as if guided by his own heart, a heart that knew if he delayed, his boy might never return. The way home wasn't long, but in this dark night, it seemed endless. The damp slopes, the thickets blocking the way, even the partly broken wire fence, where Bruno had to crawl through in pain to shorten the journey. Once he stumbled. His heavy body crashed down, hitting an old tree trunk, blood spurting from his mouth. The scarf fell. But Bruno didn't pause for more than a second. He picked up the scarf with his teeth, staggered to his feet, then continued running, as if just being able to breathe meant he had to keep going. He couldn't speak, but each running step was a plea. Each jump was a cry for help. In the distance, at the end of the dirt road, lights from the residential area began to appear. The pale yellow light cast from windows left slightly ajar. Bruno rushed past everything, straight through the small alley behind the old row of houses, around the familiar garbage dump where he and Milo used to play, then turned right into the final street, where the small, pale green house stood with its lavender trellis swaying in the wind. Bruno stopped at the door, just a few seconds to catch his breath. Then he barked. Not an ordinary warning bark. It was a painful hoarse bark that rang out in the night as if pulled from a bleeding throat. One, then two, then three, urgent, sobbing, desperate. Seeing no response, Bruno leaped at the door, using his front paws to knock hard against each wooden panel. Knocking relentlessly, knocking until his nails bled, knocking as if no one opened the door, he would collapse and die right there. In his mouth, the red scarf dangled, heavy with dried blood and mud. It wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was Milo's voice. It was the choked scream that couldn't come from the boy's mouth. It was the final plea for help. Inside the house, Ava woke with a start at the noise. She ran to the door, confused about what was happening. But when she opened it, the sight before her eyes froze her entire body. Bruno stood there, his whole body filthy, fur clumped with blood and mud. His eyes were wide open, bloodshot, breathing heavily as if about to collapse. And in his mouth was Milo's familiar red scarf, now stained with blood. Ava felt choked by something invisible. She couldn't speak. Her knees buckled instinctively, her trembling hands reaching out to take the scarf from Bruno's mouth. Still warm, still smelling of Milo. But the blood had congealed, a scratch along the scarf as if it had been dragged, and mud clinging in patches. She looked up at Bruno, not needing to ask, not needing to guess. She understood. "Oh my God, Milo, my son." Her voice broke like glass falling on tile. "Bruno, you found him, didn't you? You're telling me to go save him, aren't you?" Bruno let out a hoarse whimper, then staggered back a step. He looked straight into Ava's eyes as if begging her not to delay another second. She breathed rapidly, trembling violently, then jumped up, grabbed the phone from the charger, her fingers moving so quickly she nearly dropped it. 911. "Please, I need the police immediately," she shouted into the phone. "My son has been kidnapped. I know for certain. There's evidence. There's a witness. My dog just ran through the forest back home with my son's scarf. There's blood on it. It's Lester. Lester! He has a warehouse at the edge of town. I told you before, you didn't believe me. Now go there right away." While the other end was confirming the information, Ava turned, embracing Bruno's panting head, whispering, "You did so well. You're Mom's angel. Well done, Bruno. Mom won't leave Milo there. I promise." The dog rested his head gently in her hand, whimpering softly. Then he sat up straight, still refusing to lie down, as if there was still part of the job to do. Wait for the police to arrive and lead the way back to where the darkness was holding that boy. 15 minutes later, a police car turned into the end of the street, blue and red lights flashing, reflected in Ava's tear-filled eyes and Bruno's blood-stained fur. No one needed to ask anything more, because that scarf, the red scarf that had traveled through the forest in the mouth of an injured dog, in the lightless night, to reach the doorstep, had said it all. Milo might not be able to speak, but Bruno, through absolute loyalty and instincts that couldn't be taught in any school, had sounded the final alarm bell. And this time, no one could pretend not to hear it. Blue and red lights splashed against the white walls and the lawn in front of the house. The siren wailed as if tearing apart the space that had already cracked from the moment Bruno knocked on the door, bringing back the blood-soaked scarf. Ava stood there, clutching her son's scarf tightly, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a rare alertness. The alertness of a mother holding tangible proof of the desperation that the entire town had once ignored. 3 police cars arrived, parking across the top of the street. Car doors open, officers stepped out, led by the police chief, Mr. McAllister, with his weathered, experienced face, now furrowed with doubt. "Ms. Ava, we received a call reporting a kidnapping, but you said a dog brought back a scarf with blood? I'm sorry, but this sounds hard to believe." Hard to believe? Ava stepped forward, her voice breaking with indignation. "My son has been trying to warn you for weeks, and you ignored him just because he can't speak. Now his dog, Bruno, has run through the entire forest bringing back evidence. The blood on this scarf is real, and if you delay even one more minute..." Bruno, who had been standing beside Ava, began to growl. The fur on his back stood up. His eyes were no longer directed at the police, but at a man who had just stepped out from the crowd gathering at the top of the street. The neighborhood security guard, whom everyone knew as gentle, cheerful, always smiling and greeting children, with a habit of giving Bruno cookies every morning. He wore a security jacket with a silver badge, still holding a paper coffee cup. At first, he stepped forward intending to ask what was happening, but as soon as he saw Bruno, his face hardened, and his feet paused in a barely noticeable way. He stepped back half a step, his mouth silently forming words. Bruno hissed, then barked harshly, a sound that had never come from this dog since he came to live with Milo. Not an ordinary warning, but a continuous, fierce, and determined barking, each sound cutting through the air, as if screaming what no one dared to believe. The entire group fell silent. An officer approached intending to calm Bruno when Ava suddenly opened her jacket pocket, pulled out Milo's notebook, the worn brown leather notebook where he had recorded everything he had witnessed. She flipped to the last page, trembling as she handed it to the police chief. On it was a drawing with simple symbols, a wide-open eye, a hand holding a cookie, and a camera symbol with a red cross through it. At the bottom was a symbol that only Ava and Milo understood. "Not a good person." The police chief frowned. "This is..." Ava said firmly, "My son drew this last week. He can't speak, but he sees. This man, he's the one who gives Bruno cookies every day. But why would Milo draw him with a disabled camera? Why is it the hand offering cookies with a watching eye?" All eyes now turned to the security guard. He froze, his mouth twisting in an attempt to smile, but his hands beginning to shake. I'm just the gatekeeper. I don't have the authority to touch the cameras." An officer immediately checked the data from the control panel at the security booth, where the neighborhood's security camera footage was stored. Less than 3 minutes later, he returned, his face pale. "The cameras in this area have been turned off consistently for the past 10 days, exactly from 7 to 9 p.m. The system history shows someone entered the administrator password." "Does he have access rights?" the police chief asked. The officer nodded. "He's one of 3 people with access, and the history shows his account was the last to log in." There was nothing left to defend. The security guard, who had once been considered a kind part of the neighborhood, immediately lowered his head, then turned to run. But Bruno wouldn't let him go far. The dog growled, lunged forward, blocking his knees, causing him to fall face down on the ground, his hand still clutching the coffee cup that shattered completely. When pinned down and handcuffed, he no longer had a smile, no longer looked friendly. His eyes were cold, his voice harsh. "You don't understand. I was just helping Lester move some things. I didn't hurt anyone. Just erased a few video clips." "A few video clips?" Ava shouted, her hand tightening around Milo's scarf. "Because of those few video clips, my son was taken. Because of those few video clips, you covered up all the evidence." The police no longer hesitated. The leader ordered, "Second team, go immediately to the warehouse on the outskirts of town. Bruno will lead the way. Keep communication open throughout the journey. We have good reason to believe there are children being held captive." Bruno stood up, his chest heaving, his nose red with dried blood and dirt. But his eyes never left the road leading to the edge of town. His 4 legs trembled, but were still ready to run again. Because the final signal had been sent, And now it was time for the world to start listening. And the villain, who had once worn the most ordinary disguise in town, had been unmasked by a boy who couldn't speak and a dog who couldn't stay silent. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the headlights from the police convoy were already sweeping brightly across a corner of the forest, leading to the wasteland outside the town's edge. The sound of radios echoed urgently. Footsteps stamping hard on the damp ground resonated in the space still heavy with the smell of dew. The special police unit that had just been ordered to reinforce immediately cordoned off the area, each wearing bulletproof vests, guns at the ready, eyes following every detail, because for the first time, they weren't acting on a testimony, but on a red scarf and an injured dog leading the way. Bruno, though exhausted after the long journey, still rushed forward as if fueled by a pure instinct to protect his loved one until his last breath. He led them through the rusty fence, across the overgrown lawn, to the exact spot with the iron door locked by chains. And when Bruno got close, he stopped, barked 3 times, then began scratching the ground, a sharp sound ringing out while the entire forest was dead silent. The police looked at each other, not needing to wait. One stepped forward, using power cutters to break the chain. Another pulled open the cellar door, behind which was a darkness no one dared imagine. A strong smell of dampness and rusty iron wafted out. But the first thing they heard wasn't the wind, but small, weak whimpers, as if just emerging from the earth. Flashlights scanned every square meter of the ice-cold concrete floor, and then they saw them. 3 children, curled up in the corner, hands tied, bodies filthy, but still alive. Among them, one burst into tears when he saw the light, stammering, "Mom, is that you, Mom?" A female officer in the special unit nearly collapsed as she rushed to embrace the boy wearing the dinosaur hoodie. Her tears flowed uncontrollably. "Luke! Oh my God! Luke! Mom's here! Mom's here now, baby!" That boy was the son of the police chief from the neighboring town, who had gone missing more than 10 days ago during a camping trip near the forest. The entire police department had launched a search, but to no avail, until today. Milo, the last to be found, was still alert, but his face was pale, his eyes dark-circled from lack of sleep, and his hands scraped and bleeding from trying to resist when locked on the cold brick floor. When an officer picked him up, he didn't struggle, only tried to turn his head toward Bruno, the dog now standing silently a few steps away, breathing heavily, but his eyes never leaving the boy. And then, amid the blurry lights and crying voices, Milo raised his hands, slowly, steadily, fingers curving to form a heart shape, a symbol he had taught Bruno to use to say, "Thank you, I love you." Bruno looked at him for a few seconds, then approached silently, without barking, without wagging his tail. He bent down, gently licked Milo's left palm, where he had once bled trying to remove the chain from the dog's neck on the first night they met. That wound had healed now, but that touch seemed to recall the first promise between 2 wounded beings who dared to trust each other unconditionally. No one spoke. The entire police team stood silently, witnessing the moment between the wordless boy and the dog, who knew no betrayal, a friendship needing no words, but enough to overturn the silence of a town that had looked away for too long. Bruno exhaled deeply, as if releasing the entire journey he had run, the pain he had carried, and the final hope he had just reached. Then he sat down heavily on the ground, not from exhaustion, but because he could finally relax. His journey, in Milo's final signal, had brought them here. Amid the flashing lights and wind whistling through the old metal roof, there were soft sobs, choked embraces, and a small heart no longer beating irregularly from loneliness. Everything wasn't over, but light had begun to glimmer from the dark cellar, from the bleeding feet and the red scarf once considered too little to believe. And in that moment, everyone knew, if Milo hadn't tried, if Bruno hadn't turned back, then those three children might have been forgotten forever. The ceremony was held on a sunny afternoon in the town's central square, where for the first time residents gathered not for an annual festival or a sports competition, but to honor a boy who had never spoken and a dog who had never needed words to become a hero. A large banner hung between two ancient oak trees, simple but emotional, honoring courage when faith overcomes silence. Below the stage, people applauded endlessly when Bruno's image appeared on the big screen. His golden fur recovered, warm eyes and the red scarf, this time clean, carefully tied around his neck like a medal. Beside him was Milo in a simple white shirt, holding his mother's hand tightly and smiling slightly as Bruno bent down to lick his hand proudly. The town mayor, a man who had once disbelieved what Ava reported, now stood formally with a bouquet and a certificate. Bruno, the bravest dog in town. When they presented the medal to Bruno, the dog didn't act proud or confused. He just quietly wagged his tail, then turned to lick Milo's cheek, as if to say, "This is yours, not mine." The applause was thunderous but quickly subsided when the host bent down to ask, "Milo, would you like to say something to everyone today? Don't worry, just be yourself." A long silence followed. Ava gently squeezed her son's hand. Milo looked at his mother, then at Bruno. His eyes were no longer confused as before. He walked up each step of the stage in complete, expectant silence. No microphone, no preparation, no script. Just that boy, sunlight streaming through his hair, and hundreds of eyes watching. He stood there, took a gentle breath, then bowed deeply in gratitude. And then, in a slightly trembling but clear voice, as if his entire heart was poured into two words, Milo spoke for the first time to the world. "Bruno is my voice." The entire square fell silent for a beat. Then, as if bursting, applause, people calling his name, sobs rising from the front row where families whose children had been missing were sitting. No one laughed, no one mocked. They cried because they couldn't believe that a boy called unable to speak could make an entire town listen with a single sentence. Ava burst into tears. She had once thought she would never hear her son call anyone's name, and now he called Bruno, not as a dog, but as a part of his own soul. A month later, on the shelves of the town library, a small comic book was placed prominently beside famous children's works. The book's title was simple, The Boy and the Friend Who Needed No Words. Authors, Milo and Bruno. The book didn't have many words, mostly hand-drawn illustrations. The streets Milo had walked, the gray truck, the old warehouse, images of Bruno scratching at the chain door, hand signals incorporated like musical notes without sound. But every reader could feel the heartbeat of each page, because it didn't just tell about a rescue, but about a friendship that needed no words to reach far. Milo donated the first book to the school library with a small line written in embedded sign language. To children who were once considered unable to be heard, you don't need to shout to have value. Just one person who believes is enough. Since then, whenever anyone asked about Bruno, Milo would just smile, raise two fingers to draw a circle on his chest, the symbol for his bravest friend. And that was enough. Milo and Bruno's journey showed the entire town, and all of us, that it doesn't take flowery words to move people's hearts. With just faith, loyalty, and courage, a boy once forgotten and a dog once considered useless could change the fate of not just themselves, but also children desperate in the darkness. Bruno didn't need to say a word, but he became Milo's voice, And Milo, with all his love and determination, proved that people who cannot speak still have much to say, if we are patient enough to listen. What about you? Are you ready to listen to those who have never been heard with your whole heart, not just your ears? Share this story if you believe that sometimes a small act of kindness can save an entire life.